Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived in my beachfront home for over 20 years now. One of the main reasons I bought this place was for the private beach access. I cherish being able to sit out on the sand without crowds of people ruining the serenity. The beach near my home is open to the public about a mile down, so people looking to enjoy the ocean can easily go there. A new neighbor moved in next door last month, who I'll call Karen. I tried to welcome her to the neighborhood when I saw the moving truck, but she just rolled her eyes at me. Right away, I could tell we weren't going to get along. A few weeks after Karen moved in, I looked out my window and saw a group of at least 12 people setting up for a picnic on my private beach. I walked outside to kindly explain that this area was not for public use. Karen was among them and immediately started yelling at me. "Excuse me, we are trying to have a picnic here if you don't mind," Karen snapped arrogantly. I responded, "I do mind actually. This is my private beach belonging to my property. I'm going to have to ask you and your friends to move down to the public area." Karen's face turned red with anger. "How rude!" she shouted. "We carried everything down here already and claimed this spot. I don't see your name on this beach, so we can be here if we want." I tried to keep my cool and said, "Whether my name is written here or not, this is legally my private property. I can show you the property boundaries, but you cannot use this beach without my permission." "Ugh, not everything revolves around you," Karen shrieked. "Get over yourself and let us enjoy our picnic." At this point, I was losing my patience. "For the last time, you need to pack up and leave this private beach now. Don't make me call the police," I warned. Karen stared daggers at me and said, "If you don't get off this beach right now, I'll be calling the police on you for harassment." I shook my head in disbelief at her audacity. "I have every right to ask you to leave my own private property," I asserted. The rest of Karen's group looked uneasy, witnessing her entitled behavior, but she didn't back down. She ordered them to continue setting up and disregard me. I had given them more than enough chances to cooperate, so I pulled out my phone and called the local police department. I informed them of the situation occurring on my private beach property. Within 10 minutes, a police car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out and I greeted them. Karen's entitled attitude vanished instantly when she saw the cops. One officer came over to speak with me first. I politely explained that this was my private beach belonging to my property, and that despite multiple requests, these uninvited people were refusing to leave. The officer nodded and said, "I see. Thanks for letting me know." He turned to Karen and announced, "Ma'am, this man has confirmed that this is his private property, and he has asked you to vacate the premises. I'm going to have to ask you and your friends to leave immediately." Karen's face flushed bright red again. She stomped her foot in the sand angrily. "Are you kidding me? We're just trying to have a nice picnic. This is absolutely unbelievable," she yelled. The officer maintained a calm but firm demeanor. "Whether you agree or not, this is private property, and the owner has the right to decide who can use it. You are trespassing if you refuse to leave," he stated. The rest of the group hastily began packing up, clearly just wanting to avoid any more confrontation. Karen glared at me, seething, but reluctantly started gathering her things too. The officers waited patiently until the entire group had left the beach fully. Karen was the last one remaining, cursing me under her breath the whole time. Before following the others away, she got right in my face. "This isn't over! I'm going to make you regret this!" she shouted aggressively. I stood unfazed and said, "Pressing charges would only make things worse for you. Let's just leave it at this." Karen stomped away furiously. The officers apologized on her behalf and said I did the right thing contacting them. I thanked them for the quick response before they departed. I thought I had seen the last of Karen's entitled behavior, but I was wrong. The very next day, I looked out and saw her setting up another picnic on my beach, this time with a different group of friends. I could not believe the stubborn audacity she continued displaying. Rather than confront her myself again, I immediately called the police and reported her repeat offense. Minutes later, the same 2 officers arrived. Karen pretended to act shocked and innocent, like it was somehow a misunderstanding. The officer who spoke with her yesterday said, "Ma'am, you were informed yesterday that this beach is privately owned. You cannot trespass here whenever you please." Karen kept trying to insist it was all a misunderstanding, but the officers were having none of it. They made her and her friends leave promptly, while Karen continued cursing and screaming the entire time. This is getting into harassment territory now. You need to cease and desist trespassing on this property or we will have to arrest you," the officer warned. Karen reluctantly stomped away, shooting daggers back at me. I thanked the officers again for their help. I hoped this would be the end of it, but if not, at least the police were proving to be on my side. The next day, I kept watch out the window to see if Karen would test her luck again. Luckily, I didn't see any sign of her. For over a week, things were quiet, and I thought maybe she finally got the message. Just when I started letting my guard down about 2 weeks later, though, I glanced outside and noticed a small crowd gathering on my beach. I zoomed in with my binoculars and spotted Karen among them wearing a smug grin. This time there had to be at least 20 people. I was utterly stunned by her bold persistence. At this point, she was basically asking to be arrested. I immediately called the police and emphasized the large, unauthorized group Karen was gathering on my property yet again. The dispatcher said they would send officers right away. 15 minutes went by, and no police had arrived yet, so I went out cautiously to survey the scene. More and more people kept arriving with chairs, umbrellas, coolers, grills, and music speakers. It was shaping up to be a huge illegal party. I finally spotted the familiar police car pull in. Karen's entitled smile vanished instantly when she saw them. The 2 officers who responded before stepped out, and I hurried over to speak with them. They were just as shocked as I was by the scene and sizable group. Karen was definitely upping the ante. "We tried to warn her, but she clearly has no regard for the law or respect for your property rights," one officer said. "I'm going to go put an end to this immediately." They strode right into the crowd and used a loudspeaker to get everyone's attention. The officer announced, "This is private property and you are all trespassing. The owner has not given permission for you to be here. You need to pack up your things and exit the beach right now." Groans spread through the crowd, many people seeming surprised and embarrassed to learn they were on private land. People slowly started gathering their stuff, but Karen marched right up to the officers, fuming. "I invited all these people here for a party and you're ruining it for no reason," she bellowed. "I want to speak to your supervisor about this harassment." The officer stood firm and said, "Ma'am, this matter is cut and dry. You do not have the legal right to host a party on land that does not belong to you. You were warned explicitly about this just days ago." Karen refused to back down and continued screaming at the officer. At that point, he put Karen in handcuffs and informed her she was under arrest. 2 additional police cars had arrived by then to help clear everyone off the property. As Karen was escorted to the patrol car in cuffs, she shot me a final glare like daggers. I gave a satisfied nod, thankful to the officers for following through. With Karen arrested, I was finally confident the unauthorized beach picnics and parties would end. When she got her day in court, Karen attempted to plead ignorance about private property laws, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The judge sentenced her to 60 days in jail for repeat trespassing and harassment of me. She was also hit with hefty fines and ordered to have no contact with me whatsoever upon release. I was glad to have the law on my side throughout this ridiculous ordeal. The police handled the situation perfectly and ultimately gave Karen what she deserved. She definitely picked the wrong beach to try and claim as her own. Her entitlement finally caught up with her thanks. The next one is a pro-revenge story. First, some context. There's this product called Pure Cap, which is basically 100% capsaicin oil, the stuff that makes hot peppers hot. It has a Scoville rating of 500,000 units per drop, but no flavor, making it ideal for spicing up food without affecting the way it tastes. Putting enough of it, usually only a few drops, on any food can make it almost completely inedible to anyone who is not a total firemouth, that is, pepperhead. It's available on Amazon for about $30 per 2 ounces, but a little goes a very long way. That's why it's sold in an eyedropper bottle. Now here's the good part. In the early 2000s, my brother, Rick, was working in a call center that had a break room with a fridge/freezer, a microwave, and a small sink. He didn't take his lunch often, usually leftovers from the previous night's dinner, maybe 3 or 4 times a month, but every time he did, it would get stolen. The first couple of times he didn't mention it, just in case it was a simple mistake and the person was too embarrassed to own up. However, the third time he remembered the military axiom, "Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, but thrice is enemy action," and reported the thefts to his supervisor, Don, and the head of human resources, Dolly, every time after. However, they said that without proof, there was nothing they could do. No cameras in the break room, And so this is where my plan hatched. One night I made a roast beef dinner with potatoes and carrots, cooked all day in a crock pot with onion soup mix on top. Believe me, it was fork tender and delicious. I also made a nice salad to go with it and put away a complete dinner serving for him to have for lunch on his next shift. The next night he came home and said his lunch had been stolen again, so the next morning I made a really deluxe roast beef sandwich, thickly sliced with lettuce, pickles, cheddar, and mayonnaise on an 8-inch hoagie roll, so whoever was stealing would think they'd hit the jackpot 2 days in a row. I also loaded the roast with pure cap, like 4 droppers worth, about 30 to 40 drops on the meat alone, and made sure it was all completely absorbed before closing the sandwich so the roast looked really juicy. I even mixed some into the mayo and put some more on the bread, because bread tends to downplay the fire a bit. Rick came in about halfway through the pure cap application and asked what the hell I was doing. I looked back with an evil grin and said, "Oh, just making a little present." Wink for the lunch thief. My grin was instantly copied on his face because he was the one who had originally told me about the stuff after he'd used it to prank a former roommate, so he knew what was going to happen. Then he went to finish getting ready for work. I could hear him chuckling the whole time. I even gave him $5 on his way out because that one sandwich shop with the green and yellow logo was only a couple of blocks from his job and still had their $5 foot-long promotion going. When Rick got home that night, his grin was even bigger as he related the events. He was between calls only a couple of hours into his shift when suddenly there's this god-awful howling from the break room. Everyone who wasn't on a call right then, including Dolly, rushed in there to see the sandwich on the table with one bite taken out of it, the half-chewed bite laying right next to it, and Don at the sink desperately trying to wash the capsaicin inferno out of his mouth, not knowing that water only makes it worse. Don was ostensibly friendly and reasonable, so he was well liked by his people. I guess he thought that would make some sort of difference because he pointed directly at Rick and yelled, "He tried to kill me!" Then went back to trying to put out his mouth fire, with water. Dolly picked up the bag the sandwich had been in, which clearly had Rick's name in big red letters in his handwriting. She looked at Rick. Rick looked back with a completely straight face and shrugged. So Dolly grabbed the guy by the arm and dragged him to her office with him, streaming tears and snot the whole way. By this time, the water had sent the pure cap into real overdrive, and Don had to just stand there and burn while Dolly and the call center's manager, Bill, dressed him down for about 15 minutes, finally ending it with his termination for theft. The guy could hardly even speak from the burning tears and runny nose that sandwich caused. And besides that, he had no defense anyway because he'd just outed himself for stealing an employee's lunch. The company had a zero-tolerance policy about that kind of thing, especially when higher-ups steal from the people they manage. Rick was back at his station and on a call when Bill personally came over smiling and said that Dolly wanted to see him when he was free. Rick gave a thumbs up knowing fully well why she wanted to see him, took the call to its conclusion, and went to Human Resources. Here's how he described the encounter. Rick, "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Dolly, "Yes, I do. First, being the aggrieved party, you're not in trouble. Second, what the hell did you put in that sandwich?" Rick, "Actually, my brother made it." He pulls the bottle of pure cap out of his pocket and sets it on Dolly's desk with a smile. Dolly picks up the bottle and reads the ingredients list, which literally just says, "Capsaicin oil, 500,000 Scoville units per drop," bursts out laughing and hands it back. Rick, "There was kind of really a lot of that in the meat and the mayo and the bread." Dolly, still giggling, "You know what? Go ahead and take your lunch break now, and when you get back, we'll talk about making you that section supervisor." So he did. Rick still says that was the most emotionally satisfying sub-sandwich he's ever had. He declined the super position, though, so they promoted a different person from that section, a really nice lady, Carrie, who had also witnessed the sandwich debacle. The whole office laughed about it for weeks afterward, and every new hire for at least a year got to hear the story, as both entertainment and a warning. I smiled about it for a month, and both Rick and I rarely miss a chance to tell people about Pure Cap and its potential applications regarding lunch thievery. I never did hear anything else about Don, but I imagine getting hired anywhere else, not to mention being promoted to a managerial position, was fairly difficult with that huge red flag for theft on his record. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was visiting my girlfriend at her townhouse. The townhouse is located at the entrance of the neighborhood, and not far from it is a sign warning of cars being towed. The sign displayed the name and number of the towing service. In the section of this subdivision with the townhomes, there are a few clearly designated no parking zones, but there is no such designation in front of her townhome where I was parked. Around 8:30 that evening, while we were upstairs relaxing and watching TV in her bed, I suddenly saw some lights flashing through the upstairs window, followed by a knock on the front door. When I looked out, I saw my car hooked up to a tow truck with the driver just standing there waiting for me to come down. He had pulled up, hooked up my car, and then turned on his lights instead of entering the neighborhood with his lights on. I went downstairs to protest him hooking up my car, and pointed out that it wasn't in a no parking zone. He then informed me that according to Homeowners Association rules, the spaces in front of all townhomes were considered no parking zones, even if they weren't marked as such. I later found out that this was true, although my girlfriend was never aware of such a rule. He then offered to drop my car if I paid a $90 drop fee. This was his scheme, collecting drop fees without actually having to tow a car. In the short 3 weeks that he had the contract for this subdivision, he had already targeted numerous homes in the neighborhood with this scam. Then this guy made a mistake. In his attempt to be seen as the good guy just doing his job, harassing people late in the evening for quick money, he offered to write on the ticket that he towed the car to the townhouse from a nearby interstate, instead of writing it up as a drop fee for illegal parking. According to him, I could then turn it into my auto insurance to get them to cover it. That way, I could get my money back from the scam he was running by collecting drop fees from unsuspecting homeowners. I accepted the offer, which at the time seemed like I was catching a bit of a break. Being roused out of bed and having an angry confrontation with a tow truck driver seemed just a bit more tolerable, knowing I would be able to get my money back. Still, the situation just eats at you, and it's hard to let it go in the moment, even if eventually you are getting your money back. The next part of the story involves a wealthy landowner who developed his family's 300-acre farm to create this subdivision. He continued to live in a more affluent, elite section of the subdivision and maintained a position as the head of the homeowners association that created this rule of no parking zones that existed only on paper. This rule had been added years after the townhomes were built with their clearly marked no parking zones. I won't delve further into that part of the story for the sake of brevity, which may seem a bit ironic at this point. Suffice it to say that this homeowners association and the person running it are not well liked, and what took place between me and this towing company was a small victory over them as well. Anyhow, the next morning I began thinking more clearly about the night before, even if I was still a bit angry. I wanted revenge for the intrusion and the injustice of others wielding power over me. Then it dawned on me that what this driver was doing might be illegal. I called my sister-in-law, who owns an auto insurance company, to confirm my suspicion that the way this tow truck driver wrote out his towing tickets constituted insurance fraud. She confirmed that I was correct, that what this driver was doing was indeed insurance fraud. I then called up the towing company and told them that if they did not give me a full refund, I would report them for insurance fraud. 15 minutes after I made that phone call, the tow truck driver who had kindly offered to drop my car for $90 showed up at the townhouse with cash to give me a full refund. He then went to several other homes on that street and gave refunds to other people he had extorted in the 3 weeks that he had had the contract for that subdivision. I watched as he drove down to the end of the street, the entrance of the subdivision, got out and removed the sign with the tow company's name and number. He canceled his contract with the homeowners association. After word got around about what had happened and why, it took the homeowners association 6 months to find another towing company to take the contract. The reason the homeowners association, under that guy's rule, had changed regulations to not allow parking in front of townhomes was simply that the townhomes were at the front of the subdivision. So he and a few other wealthy homeowners thought it was unsightly to have cars parked at the curb when they drove by. That's it. They simply didn't like the aesthetics, and their sensibilities took precedence over the rights of the lesser inhabitants of his fiefdom. If I had actually lived in that neighborhood, I think I would have taken more drastic measures, up to and including getting this tow company's license revoked, and maybe even pursuing jail time for the truck driver. Not to mention, I would have created a bigger legal headache for the homeowners association. However, my girlfriend is an immigrant and is fearful of American power structures. She insisted I be satisfied with a refund, which is a win against corruption she would have never dreamt of in her home country. I abided by her wishes. She found a new home, an actual house, in a different neighborhood with an homeowners association that operates with a minimal level of interference with residents and is very pleased with the way it is run. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.